I'm very slow. There you go. So tonight we have Susan Meissner. If you've been here from last year, she was with us with the nature of fragile things. And she's at the top right corner of my little screen. Wave your hand, Susan. And Kristina McMorris, one of the other authors of the book we read this month, is joining us from just outside Portland, Oregon. And Susan, by the way, has moved from San Diego when we last met with her, all the way up north of Seattle. So she's having some weather shock, I think. Right?
Yeah, but we signed up for it, so we know what we're in for.
Oh, good. Oh, good. And so this month, before we get started, I want to just sort of go over little house rules, if you guys don't mind. I ask everybody that's on the call to mute your phone or mute your machine so that we don't have barking dogs and screaming kids and just background noise that will interfere with the discussion. Unless you're talking, and of course, when you're talking, then you obviously unmute. Secondly, there's a raise your hand feature down here someplace. I'm really terrible at how this thing works. Where is it? It's with more? No. I'm bad with it.
Reactions.
Function.
Reactions.
Thank you, Avery. Under reactions, you can raise your hand to speak, or otherwise, as long as I haven't got more than 30 people on the phone, I can see you guys all on my screen. You can also do this. I'll put you in the queue to ask questions. There's also a chat feature at the bottom of the screen as well, where you can send messages either to individual participants or to the group. And if you guys were on early, a couple of you guys were, I used that feature to tell you that we would be 7:30 tonight because Susan had to take her husband to the airport. And I'm just so glad that she was able to join us for this meeting tonight. So with that, I want to get started. As I said, I introduced our hosts, our authors. We read When We Had Wings this month. It's a brand new book. It came out in October, I believe. And it was a collaborative book. I think this is the first one I've picked that has had multiple authors. And so that gives us a whole different line of questioning that we can ask of them. And so I wanted to sort of start. I love this book. I'll just put it off right out there. I don't cry a whole lot. Kristen Hanna makes me cry. Susan Meissner makes me cry. I don't know which part you wrote, Susan, but I'm just telling you at the end, I was all choked up. And I thought it was an incredible story. And what I found fascinating is it sounds to me like your agent is the one. Is it your agent? You both have the same agent? Or an agent had represented, to you guys, let's do a World War II collaborative piece. And I guess, Susan, you're the one that sort of said, let's come up with, let's take these nurses during the Philippine battles and bring them forward. But my question really is, were there other stories that you guys considered and kind of argued over before you selected on the nurses sort of theme?
Actually, we found that idea rather quickly, and I just stumbled upon it when I was looking for what we really wanted were female heroines of some kind, women who had kind of a pivotal role in World War II, but who hadn't been written about many times over already. So we wanted an untold story, but one where it showcased women in really significant roles whose story should be told. And I found they're known as the Angels of Bataan. If you've read the book, you might have picked up on that. That's their moniker in history, is the Angels of Bataan, even though not all of them are on the Bataan Peninsula. That's the collective name given for these military nurses who were stationed in the Philippines during World War II. And when I came across a documentary about them, I thought this might be our idea. And I sent it off to Kristina and Ariel, and they both watched the documentary right away. And we realized we had our untold story. These women were just amazing people all the way around. Their story is incredible. It's inspiring, and it hadn't been told. So it was the idea for us.
Yeah.
Good.
I was just going to add too that we're in the really amazing, unique position that we do not take for granted. Let me tell you that the publisher HarperCollins came to us. They went to our agent Elizabeth and then had asked if the three of us would write this book together. So given that we were already friends, it was not a hard decision. Mm-hmm. So I call it like the Ocean's 11 of the literary world, and that you get to kind of play with your friends and they
Mhm.
pay you at the same time, you're like, this sounds like a good day at work. So that
Mhm.
was really, really easy and such a joy because, and we had never, I'd worked on anthologies before. I had led one called Grand Central, but we all wrote our own individual novellas and had characters that kind of made cameos in the other ones and just walked through because it was all Grand Central Terminal. But I'd never done anything where, two or even three of us had written a cohesive novel together, and we're in three different parts of the country, writing on different writing schedules because we all had our own solo books at the same time. So we can tell you more about the process, but it was new to us, and we were so proud of the nurse's story, but we were equally proud that we're like, wow, we actually did it. We actually somehow pulled this off.
Yeah. So with that, so in terms of process, I mean, I'm sure we have a lot of questions about process because I mean, to me, it's fascinating. Have you all written with other authors together before? I mean, in a collaborative sort of way? Both of you have, so you've had some experience with that, right?
I have once before with one other author. It was a different kind of writing collaboration. She had some medical issues that prevented her from being able to write. So I pretty much wrote the novel with much, she collaborated in her mind a lot. So, but the actual writing, it kind of felt to me, this was the first time for me where you have three people who are actually, that's what they do for a living, is they write, writing one story where the characters have many moments where they're separated from each other, which was helpful. But those times when they're together, we really did have to write those chapters together.
Yeah.
So who, Kristina, have you written before in a collaborative way like this?
I was about to say no, except for Grand Central, but I just forgot, which Susan probably even remembers, that I completely forgot that I had actually collaborated with my mother at one point before my first novel, my debut, was published. And she and I had, but it was more like we didn't both equally write. She helped me outline, with the two of us worked together and outlined. She's a romance author, and it was a women's fiction book though. So what's funny is, I call myself the PG-13 girl and she's the R-rated one, ironically. So I'm always, she's like, she goes, Chris, I don't understand. You do like, they kiss and it fades to black and they smoke a cigarette. And I'm like, what is wrong with that? And she's like, you're missing all the good stuff. Oh, okay, Mom, you do you. So we had worked on a novel together before that really was, that ended up with a small press and stuff, but really that one was more like she had helped me outline. I did the writing. It was like a writing workshop for me. And then we would edit together. So in that way it was very different, and it was more like a learning process for me.
Okay. So, I mean, this is my next question, and then I'm going to turn it over to other folks. I got tons of others as well, but my question really is, okay, so there's three characters. Who wrote which one?
Right.
I know everybody wants to know.
Yep.
We know that you guys had to do that, but we're just trying to figure out who wrote which one.
You guys want to guess, or you want us to just tell you?
Well, you guys want to guess?
Yeah, I guess. What do you think?
I don't know Ariel's writing, so I only know really Susan, so that's going to make it harder.
Yeah.
But I mean, I was thinking that Susan wrote the Penny character. No?
Didn't. I wrote Eleanor.
You wrote Eleanor.
I did,
Kristina.
yes.
Who wrote Penny then?
Ariel did.
Ariel, yeah.
Ariel, okay.
Yeah.
And you wrote
Kristina.
I wrote Lita.
Lita.
And so being half Asian, that kind of, now that you see, I would joke and say, I joked early on to other friends saying, oh my gosh, our timeline was very tight with this. And I thought, oh my gosh, if I fail completely, of course, I did not tell Susan and Ariel this until we were done. But I said, if I fail really miserably and just have to throw it together, which of course I felt really good about Lita's story, but and I was proud to tell her story. But I said, oh my gosh, if this becomes a hot mess, then I'm going to just request that they not put my photo in the back of the book, and they'll never guess who wrote Lita. Because McMorris will not give it away. Yeah, so I'm half Asian myself, half Japanese, and I'm English Irish on the other side. And so writing Lita as a mestiza, as you know from reading it, being half Filipina, really resonated for me. And I was, I felt like when someone is kind of stuck between worlds and doesn't know exactly what culture they fit in, especially in that timeline, that was something that I felt that I could bring to the table.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know Ariel's writing, so that hurt my head. Did
Yeah.
anybody else gets it right? Anybody get it besides, anybody? No?
Christina, yeah.
Okay, I have a poll. If we were talking about characters, we can come back to it, but for right now, let me just open up for a couple questions and then we'll do a poll on the characters themselves. So who's got a question? Anybody got their hand up? I know some of you guys are big question people. Well, while you're thinking, why don't I run the poll really quickly? Because I know there's lots of questions. How do I do that, Avery? I'm terrible at these things. Polls, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to launch. So it really is, the question is going to be, which nurse do you relate to most? And so just sort of vote in to get a sense of, not a matter of liking which one's best, but which one did you relate to more than the others?
Susan, are you voting?
I guess I should, right?
Yes, right?
I totally voted. Are you kidding? No, watch, I'll put Penny. Just to throw you all off.
Okay. Anybody else left to vote?
That's really fun. I've never had that happen.
haven't
during meetings
either. What a
before.
Ever
fun
done polls
feature.
before?
No.
Fun thing.
Like
Okay.
hundreds of these. That's so fun.
All right.
Mhm.
I'm going to share the results. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Cool. Oh, nice.
So it looks like 43%. I got to see here. 43% found
That's
Petty
great.
to be the one that they related to most. 29%. You can read the numbers there. But interestingly, somebody didn't relate to anybody in particular, and then a couple of us felt they could relate to all three. I cried over all three of them, just letting you know. So interesting.
Then we have done our work if we made you cry.
There you
Right.
go.
We're like, yay, we made you cry.
Thanks,
In the
right?
best way, hopefully.
Okay, is it gone now? We're good.
Mhm.
All right. So questions. Miriam got her hand up. Unmute, my dear.
I might as well start. So first of all, I'm going to say I really love the book. And I only say that with hesitation that I love the book, in that I read Angels of the Pacific and The Indomitable Florence Finch
Oh, that's a great book.
this
Yeah.
past year or so. So I already knew the story. So I was waiting, I kind of like knew it was going to happen. So I think that you pulled the tension really well together. So I'm curious to know what other types of sources you used as you were pulling your characters together, and why you chose that story or those particular threads of the story.
Mhm.
Do you want to take that, Suze?
Sure. Well, our main source of information came from a really stellar nonfiction work called We Band of Angels. It's a terrific book. If you haven't read it and these women interest you, it's a great book because it's about the real people. And the woman who wrote it is a college professor and an RN herself. And she wrote it in the late 90s, back when 21 of these heroic women were still living. Sadly, they've all passed away now. So she was able to actually interview and talk to 20 of them, which is pretty amazing. It's a fascinating, wonderful book. It's We Band of Angels by Elizabeth R. Norman. We highly recommend it. So that was our main source, our go-to Bible. And as far as picking like our individual characters, I'll let Kristina tell you why she chose to give lead at the storyline that she did. But for me, I chose Eleanor to be a girl from Minnesota who had never seen the ocean, because that was my father-in-law. He joined the Navy at the age of 17 at the end of World War II. He had never seen the ocean and he joined the Navy. And by the time he graduated in May of 1945, all ready to fly. He graduated as an aeronautical engineer. But of course, in May 1945, the war in Europe ended and the war in the Pacific was just about to end. So he never saw combat in World War II, but he did in Korea. He flew many combat missions in Korea. So he did end up seeing the ocean, a lot of it. But that was his life, is he had never seen the ocean. And I had her growing up in a rural area of Minnesota where, the horizon goes on forever. She's a dairy farmer's daughter, and she's careful with her heart, but she has fallen in love and she doesn't really she doesn't know that the man she's fallen in love with is engaged, because men don't wear engagement rings. And she, if you read the book, that he's just a nice guy. He's nice to everybody, but she picked up on his niceness as affection, and that's not what it was. And so I had her going off to Manila, 8,000 miles away from home, to kind of get her life back together. It's our purpose when we begin a story for you, and this is not a spoiler. Every story is this way. We'll give you a character who on page 1, something is up with them. Something's not quite right with their life. Otherwise, they're not very interesting. And then something happens in the story that kind of vaults that person into the world of the story. But they already come to the page with something, either some kind of wound or a want. And so for Eleanor, she really wants to get over her broken heart and to feel like she can trust in love again. And so I followed one particular Navy nurse, Dorothy Still, only because she wrote a memoir. I was able to read her memoir and use it. And so a lot of the things that happened to my character happened to Dorothy too, but their stories are not the same. I wanted to have a lot of literary license. And so she is not a real person. Eleanor is not, but she's based off of a lot of the experiences of Peg Nash and Dorothy Still.
As far as Lita goes, and I've got to insert here really quickly before I talk about Lita. Sue and I have done a lot of these interviews, and we've had the absolute best time touring together too, physically, and that was just sitting on the same plane together. I made sure our seats were right next to each other, and at last. And this is the first time actually that it occurred to me that even as many times I've heard you talk about him joining at 17, not seeing the ocean. And I just realized, it dawned on me that I think my grandfather was the same.
Really? Wow.
And I don't know that for a fact, but I know he joined at 17, got his mother's permission at 17, which seems insane now because I have a son that's about to turn 17. So that blows my mind. That's my baby. So puts it in new perspective, but she had allowed him to join after Pearl Harbor's attack. And he was an Iowa farm kid. So that just struck me just now, after all these times we've been together, that I would venture to guess that he probably never saw the ocean either. And he was a Navy signalman on a destroyer escort.
Wow.
And that's when he, fell in love with my grandmother, writing letters back and forth. So, and that inspired my whole writing career. So anyway, that being said, as far as Lita goes, so the reason why I chose her, at first I wasn't going to make her mestiza, but then when I was trying to think, like Susan said, about kind of what sort of issues they're bringing to the table right from the beginning, I really liked that idea. It made her different than the other characters, and something that I could personally relate to. As far as it being just an absolute natural, aside from me being half Asian, like I said, my connection with her was direct with being Filipina, because my best friends growing up were all Filipina. And I'm still good friends with them to this day. But as Susan knows, I like to joke, which is so true though, if you cannot be friends with one Filipino person. That is impossible, right? If you're friends with one, you are friends with many. It is such a beautiful community, and they are so close-knit with family typically, and they love their food, right? They cook for days for every like Father's Day. They would cook for days for Father's Day, Mother's Day, like any excuse. And you would graze at their house all day long, which I just love, with the lumpia and the leche flan and all those foods that I got to then we all did into our stories, which was very fun. But those are my childhood foods, going over and hanging out their house. And they all lived within like 3 blocks of each other. So many cousins, so many aunties. And it wasn't until I started writing this story, Lita story, and reached out to my friends, I need your help. And they were like, of course. I'm like, first, I need your cousins' names. Give me all your relatives' names, because I need names for these characters. And luckily they lent me all the names, which was amazing. But it wasn't until reading about the nurses that with Wee Band of Angels, and then so fortunate to find the indomitable Florence Finch, and then reading up on the Filipina nurses, because there was a lot, even less information about them that we found out there, as scarce as it was about the other nurses. I remember one time calling Ariel, at least Susan didn't get my earful on that point, but I called Ariel saying, even in We Band of Angels, which is a phenomenal book, but a collection wise. And I said, why are the Filipino nurses just kind of brushed aside all that, like the only times they're mentioned in there, it was kind of, they were like little girls is kind of how they were treated, and Mama Josie sort of saving them, but that's it. And you'd never hear from them again, but then she'd mention a count of how many survived this or how many were transferred here. And there was so little. And of course, I don't blame, the author was phenomenal. I think that she probably wasn't fortunate enough to get interviews and find those women who were technically civilians, even though they were working for the US military. So I'm sure they were harder to track down as well. So understandable. But that being said, I had to dig more online and try to find more information about them. And then what was amazing is learning about the, as you know from reading it, the immigration channel that was set up specifically from US nursing from the Philippines over to the US, really spotlighted, and I had no idea how many Filipino nurses, male and female, that there are in the US. And when I mentioned that to my friend Angie, and by the way, my character Angelita is named after my friend Angie's mother. So I still consider her like a tita. So she's like an auntie to me. And so we all call her Lita. And so that's where she got her name. And De Los Santos is the one I used for her friend in the story. De Los Santos is Angie's maiden name. So everybody got everybody got inserted. I like to wear a t-shirt sometimes that says, be careful or I'll put you in my novel and it won't be pretty. But in this case, it was all good. So yeah, so with Angie, last thing I'll mention is that when I brought it up to her, I said, I had no idea that there were so many Filipino nurses. And she said, oh yeah, of course. And she started listing them, said, if you want any of them to read your story for fact checking, let me know. And she listed off at least a dozen of her cousins and aunties that are all Filipina. And I had no idea until then. And it fits with the culture, you know, as you probably, if you know them, you know, they are just a giving, kind, nurturing sort of culture.
Thanks. So Pauline, you had a question?
I do. So I can hear how each of you, investigated and pursued your particular characters, but what was the process that you used to intertwine them so where they came together and crossed paths, and you did it in a way that, it all kind of worked together. So
We were lucky in the fact that we were writing about an event that really happened. The occupation of the Philippine Islands really happened. And so we had the time frame was laid out for us. We knew what happened when, and we weren't going to change that. And we also knew when these nurses were together and when they were not. We knew that up until the bombing started on December 8th, they got to see each other frequently, even though they weren't stationed at the same bases. They got together at the Army Navy Club on weekends. So we knew that they could see each other there. But once the invasion happened, they were separated. And it's covered in Elizabeth's book, how infrequently the Army and Navy nurses got to see each other. There was a period of months at Santo Tomas, excuse me, when they were together. And other than that, they were not. So that's really how we were able to make our chapters, where I could spend a whole chapter on Eleanor and not have her interact with the other two nurses because they were separated. And so we knew when they were together, we knew when they were apart. And that actually made it easier for us, I think, in any case, to be able to lay out the story about how to intertwine three different separate people into one cohesive story, because the plot was laid for us by the events of true history.
And that's where history, when it's convenient for writers, we get really excited. We're like,
Yes.
oh, I'm so glad that worked out so conveniently.
Because sometimes it's not convenient.
Yes, that's so true. Yeah. So that was one time we're like, oh, thank you, history.
Well, on that same note, a follow-up there. So that's sort of how in terms of the timeline, but in terms of the one voice and that same process, I mean, I thought the characters were well written and as if one author had written them. I mean, if you didn't know, you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell from my perspective. So did you guys use a separate editor, or did you all do that yourselves, editing each other's work to make it sort of that one voice?
You want to take that one, Kristina?
Sure. Yeah. I don't know about you, Suze, but I think we're even surprised
Yes. Mhm.
of how much and it's such a compliment, how much we've heard that since the book came out, that a lot of people said that it reads as if one author wrote the book. And that is just a huge compliment to us. And I think that we just really got lucky. I mean, that could be part of why HarperCollins and then Elizabeth, our agent, knew that it would be a good fit. So I'm sure maybe they thought of that before we did. We're just besides friends, we're great admirers of each other's work already. But really, I don't know that was our goal really, because we were feeling confident that we were writing 3 different characters. So as an author, you typically, when you write more than one point of view, you try to kind of come up with their own voice anyway, which I like to think that we accomplished, but the narrative really did, I think, flow really well. And I think because we are historical authors, there's sort of that already inherent tone to that you're not going to get if you are a domestic thriller author and have choppier sentences and more fragments and a different pace. And so we're sort of used to having that fluidity, I think, of historical fiction. But yeah, we look back now, and it really wasn't until after the tour that we said, you know what, we sort of hit us that this really could have gone badly. And I think we were so blissfully ignorant about it and so tight on our own timelines that we didn't have time to worry about it, that we just said, we have a contract, we're excited about our subject, and we're really proud to tell it, and we're passionate. And then and we love working together, and that was it.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't till later that we thought, wow, this could have been bad for all of us.
And I think too that having one Google document that we were all inserting our comments into, it was that we were editing each other. We were giving each other that polishing that normally you don't get from your fellow writer. Usually you get a polishing, like how to revise to make it polished. That usually comes from your editor, but we were doing it for each other all during the writing. And so I think that's another reason maybe where it came off sounding like a unified voice, because we were speaking into each other's chapters.
Right.
That makes sense, having a combined Google document. So that helps me understand my original question, that all the dialogue, if you will, was in a place where everybody was collaborating together. So, okay,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. And that's
We felt it was pretty important. Yeah, go ahead, Kristina.
Oh, just the dialogue. I forgot about that. Of course. Right. So that dialogue was definitely something that when our characters were in the same scene, we did give it to the other author, whose character it was, to make sure that the other person could tweak it and make sure that it seemed consistent with what Penny or Eleanor or Lita would say and act and their mannerisms. And so we were able to kind of tweak our own character in that scene. So that worked out really well.
Yeah.
Interesting. Janet?
So I really like the book. I have to say that I've read a lot of World War II historical fiction work. I'm Jewish, and it's really been a thing for me that I've gone into. And sometimes I just try to get away from my aspect of it. So I really enjoyed the fact that it was completely different viewpoint. And as far as the Filipino go, I live in San Francisco. I used to work for County of Alameda Health Department. Tons of Filipino people, a lot in public health and nursing. But anyway, I don't remember if I cried, but I got very angry. And I have to ask Kristina, being half Asian, I have to ask you, how did you not get so angry at the Japanese? Because I'm already kind of pissed off at the Germans for a long time. And my mother lived in Germany she grew up there and got to leave. But this aspect of like how badly the Japanese treated people. I mean, I know about how they treated the Chinese in that whole thing, but I never knew about this part of things. And I was so enraged that's the emotion that kind of like overtook me more than anything when I was reading this story, is how just enraged I was, how they could have treated people that were non-combatants, had nothing to do with anything, were trying to help people, and how they could try to starve them to death like that. It just blew my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I can tell you, I'd written, my second novel is Bridge of Scarlet Leaves, and that one involved the non-Japanese spouses who lived in the internment camps voluntarily. And when I researched that and learned more about the Japanese Americans and the ones that served with the military intelligence and all these fascinating things I never knew about, it was really during that time that I learned a lot more about the conditions and how bad it was. I have a POW in that story that ends up in the Pacific, and it's very ugly. And I had read all about Louis Zamperini's experience when I was researching for my story, because I had a tail gunner and who becomes a POW in the Pacific. That was right before then Unbroken came out. And I remember I had already written mine, and I went, oh, I'm so glad that more of a spotlight is going to go on his story, because it was so incredible.
Right. Yeah, I read that a long time ago.
Right?
Yeah, that was
Amazing, amazing. And Louis Zamperini had written an autobiography, so that's what I had inspired my character, even though I didn't write anything, just the experiences, not the character. And so for me, I'm in an interesting position, I think, because back then, so less so this time around, because I'd been through all that research before. But my goodness, there were some really hard days when I wrote that one, when I was researching about the Bataan Death March and things that, we're all familiar with, but to a point, I hadn't gone into the weeds on that before. And that was probably one of the hardest days of research, of reading firsthand accounts of some of the things that the Japanese soldiers did, especially when they knew they were losing, of just eliminating, evidence, and much like the Germans did, and with the camps, putting them in their bunkers and then flamethrowing on the outside. I mean, it was just the inhumanity that just comes out, that people are capable of committing against each other in general, is horrifying. And those would be hard emotional days, and I have to go shake it off. But I also know that some of those atrocities, not on such a big scale, but of course, I think we all know some of those atrocities on a smaller scales happened across the board, on every side. Like they're just terrible stories that can come out, and also beautiful, amazing, inspiring, hopeful stories of how kind and amazing and generous that humans can be at the sacrifice of themselves and their loved ones to save a stranger. So, and I hear that across the board too, but
I'm going to cry.
Oh, and those are the stories, right, that we love to tell, and especially these nurses. But yeah, it is, and for me, being half Japanese, it is an interesting compartmentalization, I think, in that separating myself and also how it gives me hope. More than anything, I think that I see the culture being, hopefully we all agree, is so different today in a very short time span, compared to humanity, how long we've been here. We're just talking, like just a handful of decades. And the way that we view the Japanese culture today of being very peaceful and such a safe country, and humble and beautiful, and wow, how different it was just a short time ago. So I think I pull inspiration from that, because there are such ugly stories that, like the Manila Massacre, that the three of us had no idea existed until we came across that in research. And I remember messaging them saying, this has to go in the story, but I'm going to keep it toned down, because the reality of it was so much worse than what I put in the book.
Wow.
Diana?
Thank you, ladies, both of you, for joining us this evening. I listened to the book because that was the only way I could get my hands on it quickly. And I have a question about that in general, but my actual question is about the romances. So all three of the women fell in love. And did you guys have a conversation about whose romances would come to fruition, or how did you make the decision, that somebody would get married in the end, or then somebody doesn't, or somebody dies? Can you talk about that a little bit?
As I remember it, we were open to all possibilities. I think sometimes when you plot a book, it's nice to leave some room for, I guess what you call the intuitive process. So if you've read the whole book, then what I'm about to say won't be a spoiler. If you haven't read the book, just plug your ears for a minute. But
mute us.
yes, it was my plan to have Eleanor go back and marry John, the pastor. I didn't know how I was going to pull that off. But I will tell you that while I was writing and while she was learning to almost fall in love again with David, there were a couple of days where I thought, should I let him live? Because I knew he probably was going to have to be a casualty of war for her to be able to go back home and marry this other man, and that he was going to teach her. I thought, this man is going to teach her about love, but he's not going to stay. He's going to die. And but there were moments where I thought maybe I should keep him alive and have her end up with him. But it was a fleeting thing. So for me, I always knew that she was going to end up with her pastor friend that she had fallen in love with. And I think Ariel, if I remember right, and I'll let Kristina answer for her, but Ariel, I think she went back and forth on what to do with her, the quartermaster, and should I have him end up with him? Will it be too trite? And I think she even tried a couple of endings where she doesn't. And I think that's kind of cool when you're writing, is to be able to go outside the lines and consider some things and make the best decision for you, the reader. Because in the end, we want you to feel really satisfied about what happens. And so I think if Ariel were here, she would tell you that she went back and forth and ultimately decided to do what she did, but it wasn't like from the get-go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
That's what I remember too. And I think what's important to know of how we came about that was that the order that we wrote this in. So there are some authors that are friends of ours that also do kind of that do collaborations, and they do like a round robin. If there's 3 or 2, if there's 2, they go back and forth in chapters. In our case, we were not that bright. we were just, our schedules didn't allow it. We'll go with that. So because Susan had an opening in her schedule first, outside of her solo book, she said, I've got time first. We all outlined, I want to say we outlined this in like 2 days. I mean, it was really fast. And it came together really quickly, and we went, this is it. Susan said, I have some time in my schedule. Why don't I jump in and kind of lay the foundation? So she wrote Eleanor's chapters all the way through. And then it went to Ariel was next. And also, by the way, huge kudos to Susan, who went, you know what, that outline that we came up with, and we were going to do like one character does the first third, second one, the third, second, and then the third character, the third. So that's the last part of the book. So that's why I actually thought, oh, this will be easy because we're not intertwining really, like I'm just going to be at the end of the book. So we don't really have to coordinate that much. So it seemed really easy to do separately. And then because Susan is awesome and horrible at the same time, because she wanted to give us a challenge. She wrote hers and said, you know what, girls, I don't think that is as good as, and 100% she's right, as us. Now that I've started writing, I think it makes more sense for us to intertwine and for us to alternate chapters, which sounds great until you realize, oh my gosh, how am I going to do that? It's because I thought my story was all at the end of the war. So she laid the foundation, and then Ariel was next, and she was available. So Ariel said, okay, I'm going to jump in now. And so she started writing her chapters around Susan's, and we had a new outline by that point that we kind of cut and pasted and figured out where we would alternate. And that's where she was, what we say, she's like our hinge is what she calls herself, which is great. And she was the one that then knew when our characters would come in and out based on history. And so if you notice, all the chapters that, we intertwine are really through Penny because of history. So, and then it came to me, and I love that Ariel says it was my job to land the plane, except the runway had completely moved and changed. And now it was zigzagged and in a circle. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is not what we talked about. And our deadline is coming up. So I relied on them. We made some changes to some chapters here and there to make some of it work. And I came up with my best solutions in the shower where it's quiet and everybody leaves me alone. Every mom knows that is your quiet space. So that's where I came up with, since you've read it, I can say that's where I came up with the solution of Lita, thinking that she has malaria, knowing she has malaria, knowing that she's very sick. And I wanted to end on a cliffhanger. And when I did that, then I looked at the next chapter and I went, wait a minute, there's like 8 months that pass in the next chapter. How can I have a cliffhanger 8 months later with malaria? And then I thought, how do I do this? How do I do this? And it was a good challenge because I'm like, I have no choice. I have to come up with a solution, and I didn't want to lose the cliffhanger. So I was showering one day and I went, wait a minute, because malaria tends to have recurrence. And I thought many bouts these nurses went through. That's when I thought she wakes up in the hospital and doesn't remember the fact that this is her second bout with malaria, and it can be even worse. So I'm like, yay, I found the solution. So that was good. So I want to give that context as far as how our process went. And then I forgot what did the question that we started with?
Your romance.
Romance. Thank
About
you.
the romance.
Yeah.
How you decided who would end up with who and so on.
Absolutely. So how it ended up at the end is that because I was last, I then knew already how the other two were going to end. And because of that, I made a deliberate choice. Before I dove in, I knew then that I really liked that all three stories would end slightly differently, and hopefully be a very satisfying ending. And I always love when I write characters that, like with The Ways We Hide and whatnot, is that when they set out with a certain mission, and they have all the fears that they are going to avoid no matter what. And then by the end, they have to tackle all of them, and they end up very often in a place that they wouldn't have expected or ever wanted in the beginning. But it's satisfying for them at the end because they've grown. And so in Lita's case, I thought, I think the romances were so common. I mean, how many soldiers, right, really in real life met a girl in one night and wanted to exchange letters and take a photo of her with them because they need that hope and something to come home to. And So I think that was really consistent with that, of having something other than operations and surgeries that were horrifying all day. And then to have it end where, in my character's case, she ends up, of course, as you all know, realizing that her home is exactly where she started instead of somewhere far away. And that it feels like home, and she belongs for the first time, and she's figured out her identity, and they were the right people for each other at a certain time. And we all know what that's like, whether it's romance or friendship. And sometimes they split apart, but it's okay because that time was when they needed each other the most.
Thank you. I read a lot of historical fiction, and I really like it when I learn new things. And really all I knew about the war in the Pacific was that MacArthur said, "I'll be back." And that was it. So I really enjoyed learning about all of that. So I'm going to ask a second question. I'm sorry, Sharon. I listened to this. Do you ladies have any input when they're like who your narrators are or things like that? I mean,
They do ask if we have someone in mind, and I'm sorry, I have a throat thing going on, but Kristina, I believe, knew that the narrator that we had all heard before on other books would be great for this one. And did you go after Saskia, Kristina, to see if she was available? I can't remember now.
So what happened was we just lucked out. She, the HarperCollins had said, "Hey, we need an answer from you guys right away because this narrator gets booked up so fast and she's very hard to get." And it's Saskia, how do you pronounce her last name? Marveland, I think is how we pronounce it.
That sounds right.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful name. But and I knew that she had narrated a bunch for our common friend Kate Quinn, and Kate loves her. And she's narrated a bunch of her books. And I had forgotten because it'd been many years, and I went, but I think I know her. Her name is so familiar. I was trying to think, what other books has she done? And I looked up, and she had narrated one of mine.
Oh, that's so funny.
oh, wow.
years ago, like she's so well known now. And I remember listening to her, but just not remembering her name. And I remember going, oh, she's great. And I don't listen to my audiobooks because I listen to a sample, go, oh, they're wonderful. And then I shut it down because I'll want to edit half my work.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll go, I would want to fix that sentence. It's nothing to do with them. So it was wonderful that I got to reach out to her and say, Saskia, oh my gosh, I remember loving her work of my book. So I said, I'm so glad you're doing this book. She was so kind. And I said, let me know if you need any input on the Japanese pronunciations, about the Filipino pronunciations, et cetera. And she said, oh, thank you. I might come back to you. She finished, and we were just really honored. She came back
Mhm.
and sent me to forward to them the nicest email, because you can imagine how many books she reads, and you can't love all of them, right?
No.
Because we're human. And she came back and said, I loved this book and was so touched. And that meant a lot to us, because she's obviously a very discerning narrator.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, ladies. Thank you.
Of course.
Laura?
First of all, I have to say, Susan, I'm a bit starstruck. We actually did Nature of Fragile Things for my Monday book club. So
Oh,
on Monday, I was
wonderful.
discussing the nature of fragile things.
Oh, how nice. Thank you.
But I want to say that you did the right thing with Eleanor and John. She outgrew him
Mhm.
big time. And I think, she needed someone more worldly than him. So you did the right thing.
Well, she actually ends up with John, so I'm not sure if that's okay with you, but yeah, she goes home and marries him, but she is not the same person. She's a very different person, and actually it's because she saw the world, all of it. She saw the world at its best and at its absolute worst, and from 8,000 miles away from home. So when she comes back to Minnesota, she really is a different person. And I guess in many ways he is too, because things didn't turn out the same way for him either. So it's really kind of nice when they do finally get together, they're not the same people.
They're not.
And I think that's the reason why I envision for them a very happy marriage, is it wasn't just love at first sight. It was love and then a lot of introspection and life experience. And then they came back to each other. But thank you
And
for
then-
choosing Nature of Fragile Things. I appreciate that for your book
Oh,
club.
you're very welcome. And can you tell us about the cover of the book?
Yeah, how many iterations of covers did we go through, Kristina? It was a lot.
Yeah,
We
and
went through-
the concept I think was pretty much the same through it, but it was a lot of the cover, the coloring, and the women that they chose, and the little some important tweaking that happened that we didn't want to look like a tequila sunrise.
Yes,
And
yes.
then they went more
yes.
with, we're like, it's a little sherbety. And then they, they switched it and it became like all red. And we're like, oh my gosh, it looks
It's
like
Mars.
we said they're
Yes.
on Mars. They look like they're like with that dirt ground. We're like, they look like they're on Mars. So we tweak. And then my character not being military. So
Yeah.
that was another thing that, and all the hair colors at one point were wrong. And
Yeah.
I'm like, geez, I don't know a Filipino girl, natural hair color back in the 40s that had like light brown hair. So
Wasn't gonna happen.
we got to go toward the black. Yeah. So a lot of that, but concept wise, I think it was always there. And we ended up really happy with it at the end. It felt like it encapsulated the story that you're going to get inside, which is definitely important and eye-catching,
Yeah.
we think.
Yeah, in the end, we're really happy with it. But I remember thinking, are we ever going to get the right blend of all the things we wanted? Because we did want 3 women on the front in uniform if possible, but the right uniforms with, the right kind of hairstyle for the, the early 40s. That was important. And we wanted a tropical sky just to make sure that it was known that this is about the Pacific. This is about the war in the Pacific, but not to have it look like it was a vacation book. It's not a resort book, And then the color had to be right too. We wanted the color to be evocative, but not, to look like it was a Martian landscape either. And so it took a while, but we were really happy with the one that came out as the winner.
I love too that we talked about when they hit the coloring, we thought they hit it right finally at the end. Remember?
Yeah.
And we had like 20
Yes.
to look at, and we said, we really liked that there was some darkness, as you can see. I love right behind Sue, you can see the cover there. That gray kind of ominous feel. But there's so much light that they're walking toward the light, and that just seems to perfectly fit the story.
Yeah.
Thanks, Laura. Mona, you're up. You're on mute, Mona. Mona. There we go.
I love the character of Newt, and was real happy that you actually brought her all the way to the end. And and with her actually being able to visit from the Philippines, she was in some ways kind of, I won't say typical of some of the Filipinas that I grew up with, but she was such a delight. My father served over there, so he was in Guam and the Philippines, and actually had wrote his own memoir of that time. So I found the book as a whole kind of emotionally exhausting at times, where I'd have to put it down and pick it up, and I wanted to keep going because I love the story. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
On the note of Newt, interesting, Mona, my son, I have 4 boys, and my third son, his nickname is Newt. His name is actually Zachary. Don't ask me how Newt came about, but when I read that, I thought it was a boy at first, because, I've been screaming Newt on the playground, for decades almost, so years. So interesting. Well, we're coming near the end. We have any last final questions from anybody? I know Carol says she's got a virus and she's lost her voice. Lots of stuff's going around. But I've got a note here from Mindy that she just loves the book and loves you guys, and just sort of stopped in. Like I said, I was just fascinated with it. I did have one last question. I think I'm going to look at my notes here. How long, just really quick, how long did it take you guys to get that first draft down? With 3 of you writing, so theoretically you're only writing a third of the book, right? You're only writing probably, I don't know what, 40,000 words each, maybe, or something like that. But that's, did it go faster because of that, or no?
Yeah, I think it's hard. It's hard because we were also writing our solo works at the same time. So we would write this book in starts and stops, I guess. But it is about 35,000 words a person. And my first set of 30,000-ish words, I was able to write in what felt like an easy amount of time, because I did it over a period of like 7 or 8 weeks. And I think, Ariel probably wrote hers in about the same amount of time. Kristina probably had to then, because she was writing her own book at the same time. She really was writing 2 books at once. And I think Ariel and I were able to set aside our other book while we wrote this one. And I don't think Kristina had the leisure to do that. So she might have had to write it in that amount of time. And so if you stitch all the time together, it's probably about the same as our other book, about 10 months to a year to write. Does that sound about right, Kristina?
Yeah, adding them all up. Yeah, I think I had 5 weeks left before the deadline, and I'm like, I decided that panicking wasn't going to help. So if I panic, I'm just not going to sleep, and it'll be worse. So I thought, I'm just going to go, and like I said, leave off my photo in the back of the book if need be. and then I was just so happy. I didn't sleep much for 5 weeks, but I was, of course, like I said, really, really fell in love with Lita and her story. So.
Yeah.
Well,
I had one question. I don't know if it's too late. It's getting towards the end. I'm sorry.
That's
I'm
fine,
jumping
Jane,
in
go right
really
ahead.
quickly. I'm
Of
sorry.
course.
I've been going in and out. I had some emergencies here, but first of all, the collaborative effort and I'm so impressed with that. But you mentioned a few times that you already were friends. I'm just curious, how did you meet each other? Is it through work, or I'm just curious, since it's such a group effort, and so in personal life or in business life, how did you meet each other?
Oh, that's a good question. Actually, we've known of each other from like the beginning of our writing careers, because you get into the same circles with everybody. But Ariel and I had met in 2008, so pretty early on, and became friends through another friend. So we had known each other since 2008, and Kristina and I met at a friend's house in San Diego. In probably, I don't know if that was 2011 or 2012. It seems like a long time ago now. I really don't know when it was.
Right.
But we like had already read each other's work. We were familiar enough with each other to be like colleagues from afar. But those 2 moments is when we became like friends, because we met in person. But for Kristina and Ariel, they became friends, good friends, having never met. Because didn't you guys meet for the first time in Nashville on our book tour, right?
Yeah. Just like a month and a half ago, we met for the first time, which felt weird. I think we were doing an interview, and she said, I think this is the first time we met. And we both sat there and went, oh my gosh, I think it is.
Because it didn't seem like it. Yeah.
so weird because we had known each other also online. Like, I think, on Facebook,
Mhm.
especially, we all, I think historical fiction, it seems to me more than any other genre, and maybe I'm biased there, but it seems like we really have like a sisterhood that's just.
I think so.
Um,
Mhm.
right, because-
That's so nice, and your characters have become friends, and then
Yeah.
the three of you are friends. So it's such a nice parallel. So I really I enjoyed that part of it made the book so much more meaningful.
I would agree with you there.
Mhm.
I think our friendship does find its way into the pages. I think you're right about that. Mhm.
Absolutely. And I think when our characters got to reunite, I don't know, there's one of us that didn't kind of tear up each time that the characters finally got to see each other and got, finally saw each other. And I remember when I finally got to write Lita seeing Penny, and even though I talked to Ariel a bunch and Susan all the time for the 5 weeks, and then when Lita got to see her, and then she smiled and laughed and then broke down. And I remember crying myself because I felt like I got reunited with Ariel. and the same at the end of the story when she got back with Penny again, and then finally got to see Eleanor and felt cheated, of like the short time they had together. And I felt like Susan and I also, like, we had worked together a bit, but not ever being able to really collaborate as much as we did in the beginning. And that felt so good. And I do want to add, because Ariel's not here, and I love to give her credit for this, because it felt just like the perfect, to me, the last thread that I was so happy and kind of got to tie at the end. And that was, I had put that written that Lita had married Caesar, and that's a cousin name, by the way, so of my friend, and that she married Caesar. And I really like that she finally got to move on with her life and didn't have kids yet, but that would be obviously a good possibility once she had some closure. And I'd written it and I finished the epilogue and sent it off to them. And Ariel said, I remember she sent back to me, said, I really love this ending, because again, I had to land that plane, the last section. And she said, I really love the ending. She goes, but I got to be honest with you, I was a little disappointed. I thought that Caesar, like whoever she married, I thought would be, and gosh, now I'm blanking on my own character's name, but her friend.
Lawhon.
What is it?
Raina?
Raina, thank you so much. I'm like, I can't, it's been a long day. So when she said, I thought, I was kind of hoping that Raina's cousins, one of the gorillas, like would come back, and that would have been who she married. And I went, it's funny that you said that, because yes, that is what is happening now. So I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, of course. Like, it was just such a beautiful ending that she and Raina became family. Officially by the end, and that came from Ariel, and it was just lovely how when the three of us got to bounce ideas like that off each other that you can't see because you're so close to it, and it was probably so obvious to the rest of us. And so that was that I felt, so when I got to add that in, I went, okay, it's my smart.
Thank you.
Perfect. Well, with that, we are out of time. And I just want to thank you both for joining us. And let us know when your next books are coming out. Susan, we do love your work. I think Mindy had mentioned in the chat, I don't know if you guys got a chance to look at the chat, but that she's met you both before at New York. So Wendy's, so that's lovely that she's had a chance to meet you guys someplace, somewhere.
Well, Kristina has a brand new book out. It's only been out for a couple of months. It's called The Ways We Hide, and it's an excellent book. I highly recommend it. It's a World War II book, but it's not a story you've heard before. And I don't know if Kristina has a couple seconds to talk about it, but it's a really good book about a woman who works for British intelligence in the department where they had to come up with very interesting devices for getting people out of occupied territories. And they used things that she called from the go-go gadget team of one of the branches of British intelligence that you hardly hear anything about because it's so secretive. They even use monopoly boards to get people out of occupied countries. So it's pretty cool.
Wow.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll make this very brief. I know that we've talked a long time, and of course we'd love to talk to you all night long. But yeah, I'll just mention thank you, Susan, that she's heard me talk about it enough. She could tell my whole story. My character's an illusionist, and she is the mastermind behind an escape show in 1942. And because of that, stranger than fiction, these things happened. They were recruited by MI9. And so they created escape and evade devices. They smuggled into almost anything you can think of, including monopoly boards, and helped Allied POWs escape, and downed airmen evade Nazi capture. And so she gets pulled much deeper in the war than she ever expects. And the thing that I'm very excited about with the story is that it is a very different aspect. It is more of a coming of age story for half the story. And it also goes into the Dutch resistance and the Netherlands, which, just like the Philippines, we don't see written much about. And so I thought, how come, aside from Anne Frank, how come we don't really hear about the Dutch and how they handled the war versus the French resistance, for example? And so it was very exciting to learn about what they did and how they handled it over there, but especially the gadgets. So if you go on my website, I have quick videos on there of MI9 gadgets from in World War II that I own. And I show you some of the things that they created that are phenomenal, like cards that you soak in water and they split apart. And on the backside is maps on both sides. And these were all created by magicians. So it's very cinematic in my head. And yeah, and there's some things happening behind the scenes movie wise. So we'll see, we'll cross our fingers, and I'm sending it out into the universe.
Yes.
So we'll see what happens.
Well, I will download it. I've become a Kindle person recently. I don't know how.
Mhm.
I guess I had to pre-read so many books. My husband said, stop buying them. Just put them on Kindle. Otherwise, what are you going to do?
Right.
So I'll download it and take a look, and we'll look at it and see. Sounds
Great.
exciting. Really does.
Thank you so much.
All right. All right, ladies, until next month.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you guys. Thank you so
So fun.
much for joining us. We loved the book. I loved it. I wanted to share it right away. So it was a great read, and congratulations.
So
to you both.
Sharon, what are we reading next month?
Yes, Sharon.
It is The Secret Life of Sunflowers
Nice. Oh,
by Martha
Martha Hall Kelly.
Molnar. I have not talked with her yet, but I'm working on it. So, but yes, and it's December 29th, which is, sort of in between. Hopefully you guys will all be around in town. You can just dial in and discuss that with us. Sounds exciting. Yes.
Okay.
You guys are welcome to join us too.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you.
Thank you guys. All right.
All right.
Until then, ladies.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Thanks.
I'll see you next month,
Bye.
guys. 29th.
Have a good night.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Bye.
Thank you.